Shelburne Selectboard for Tuesday, November 13th, 2018, which I now call to order. The first item that we'll consider is to approve the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda
Moved
for
by
November
Jamie.
7, 2018.
Seconded by Colleen, amended as it will be by Mary.
I would like to amend the agenda to add an executive session for the purpose of contract negotiation regarding solar energy on the new library.
Second.
Second, moved and seconded, that we consider that as a friendly amendment and vote on in the entirety.
Yes.
Any discussion? Hearing none, seeing no hands, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you. The next item are a series of select board meeting minutes, beginning with September 11, which Colleen, I'm sure, is going to move to approve.
Yep, move to approve.
And a second,
So,
Mary seconded. Any discussion?
Just September 11th, right?
September 11th. Hearing none, any discussion in the public? Hearing none, those approving signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The next meeting minutes up are October 23rd.
move to approve?
Mary moves to approve.
Second.
Colleen seconds. Any discussion? Any discussion in the public? Hearing none, those approving signify by saying aye, please.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The one following is November 1.
Move to approve.
Colleen moves to approve. Mary seconds. Is there any discussion? Any discussion in the public? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And the last is November 7,
I'll move to approve.
which Mary moves to approve. Colleen seconds. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. This is one you will simply not vote on. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you.
Do we have, wait, I'm sorry, do we have minute meetings for 10:25? Because I don't have them.
That was another one of your special meetings that
It came up, we got an email, right? For the 7th?
You know,
No, 10:25. It's not in our packet.
Mary and I worked on that too, which I'm pretty sure we forwarded to Mary Ann, so we'll have to track that down.
Okay.
Yeah. It was the same process we worked with 11-1 and 11-7. So,
back to that for our next meeting.
yeah, thanks. Next item is public comments, the first of which will come from Ruth Hagerman regarding the new Library and Town Center project update.
Hello. So let's see. You may have noticed the dirt pile is getting smaller. Should be gone soon. The foundations for the new building are complete. There's gravel's in, and the next thing that happens is they lay in the plumbing for the main floor and electrical conduits. Did I do that? Okay. And then slab and steel will come after that. So for Town Hall, we're finished waterproofing the exterior foundation. We had to patch it. Then we water sealed it with a mastic, then we put on a drain kind of mat that pulls the water down, and now they're running in French drains along both sides and backfilling it. And just a couple of days ago, the west wall of the building down on this end was power washed, and you should really stop by and take a look at it, because it is beautiful, and it's really amazing all the different things you can see down there on that end. So, and that's an important wall for the new building, that will be the east wall of the new building. It will be interior. It will be interior, yeah. And then the last thing to tell you about is our fundraising that is ongoing. We have the quad campaign, and we are, as of today, $30,000 away from the matching the match project needs. The donor recognized, basically we asked this morning, the donor's like, well, you're really close, so we will extend the deadline to an absolute no later than Monday, the 19th at 5 p.m. So if you want your donation quadrupled, you need to get it in there by Monday. You can do it online through various websites. You can send it in by mail. You can drop it off at the library. There was a flyer in the Shelburne News last week. I don't know if anybody saw the little flyer came out. You can use that as a donation for fun. So that's, I think, pretty much the news.
Between that and the 500,000, or are they the same?
It's the same donation. And what happened this summer was the donor came to us and they said, well, we've got just over 10% to bond, and interest has completely gone away. Nobody was interested anymore in donating to the bond. People said, come back with other requests. So they went ahead and switched their offer from matching only to go to the bond to matching to go to what we need to make the project. So it's still the same 500,000.
And are you $30,000 away from that?
Yep. So that's, what is that, 470,000 total. Yeah.
Pretty close. We need
Yeah.
everybody's
Yeah.
help.
That's all I have to say about the project. I guess I'll just sit down because I think I'm on the next line.
Thanks, Ruth. Kathy, you want to add anything, or? Thanks. Are there any other public comments? Sir?
We have a height difference. I'm Matt Chandler. I live in Shelburne, and I've lived here for a long time. I'm asking for some help from the select board in an issue around zoning. And the issue rises about short-term rentals in residential areas, also kind of known as the Airbnb world. Our neighborhood that I'm part of has had some conflicts in the past about that, and the zoning rules and policies of our town, and I've talked to Dean about this as well, it's tricky. The Airbnb business is new, in the last 10 years, and I'm asking the select board to kind of put that on their radar and maybe figure out how they can help neighbors negotiate that, because if you're not part of a homeowners association, which I'm part of now, one neighbor can become very much a hotel, as another neighbor is looking for that residential close-knit community that they may have originally purchased. And that conflict is troublesome to me as a community member, and I'd like some support in that. Along that same line is the idea of small businesses that are being used in residential areas also. And I know there's some rules about that already, but again, it's sort of that same area of those real small businesses that can be run out of a home, and the impact that that has on that sense of community within a residential area. So I'm kind of asking for help there, maybe getting it further up on the list of things that you might want to consider or think about in the future, and working with the zoning department or however we want to do that to try to help clarify and really help communities who are struggling with this. And my guess is that most people living in Shelburne have at some point dealt with this idea of a neighbor wanting to open up Airbnb, having a more maybe loose community than maybe they originally wanted.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. You want to respond?
There was one other item related to the library, and that's a grant application for an electric vehicle charging station through the state of Vermont. The estimate is up to $20,000 total cost, is a 10% local match, the lowest match for government-owned property. And we were hoping the select board would authorize the submittal of that. It would require designation of a grant municipal official, an alternate official, and a grant administrator, and then do so from each of your cities.
Just want to move that down to if I can find it, the discussion in number 11 on the project costs. I mean, just put it all together.
Good idea.
Anybody, okay, that's a good idea, John. We just combine them. Thanks, Lee.
And you have, just for future conversation, you have people already lined up for the administrator and,
Yes.
okay. Okay.
Any other public comments? Hearing none. Select board comments. Josh, you want to lead?
No. I'm still in recovery phase.
Mary?
Yeah, I have a couple. One, in follow-up to Mr. Chandler, I wanted to say that I think it would be something for the Planning Commission to consider, and that maybe Mr. Chandler, going before the Planning Commission to bring your concerns forward, I'd be willing to bet you wouldn't be the first person to come before the Planning Commission with this particular concern. I think it's a growing concern of neighborhoods turning into semi-transient communities because of Airbnb. It's a problem that's not unique to Shelburne, and there must be other ways that communities are responding to that, I would hope. Some ideas. The other comment, again, is traffic, and I really want to not lose sight of this, and I want to, what I want to do and what I'm able to do are two different things, obviously. I'm sure that's true for many people, but I want to be able to start coalescing and synthesizing the studies we have so that we can make a good assessment of what kind of traffic calming measures Shelburne needs and can use to make where we live safer and more user-friendly. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we have a major highway that runs right smack through the middle of our town, and I am committed to doing that, and I apologize for moving more slowly. I know this is something that has come up before, and people will remember that the Select Board voted not to accept funding from the Chittenden County Planning Commission to assist in that process, so we're on our own. At the time, I think folks felt like we had more time availability than we do, because since that vote, I'm going to say the matter hasn't been touched. And I apologize to the community for that. And I'll try to find time to start the wheels moving on that. That's it.
Thank you, Mary. I'd like to comment on the great success of the election and the role that our town clerk, Diana Vashon, played in that, in addition to a cast of thousands, some of whom are sitting right here. I think it's great testament to what's exceptional about Shelburne, not only that we had such a high turnout, but that that whole process was done with a majority of goodwill and good feeling, and with lots and lots of community help. And I would like to recognize her principal role in that. Lee?
No comments other than I agree. The elections were so well run. I'm so impressed by Diana and the whole team there. So bravo. It looks seamless as a voter, but when you're behind the scenes and seeing everything that happens, it's a lot of planning and a lot of volunteer work. So thank you all.
Nothing.
Anything else? Next item is the town manager report.
Thank you. I'll stick to one topic tonight, which I know has been on everyone's minds, and that is, where are we with the Falls Road sewer line construction work and paving? I'm told that tomorrow morning, the crews will begin milling some of the pavement by the trench and starting the paving on Falls Road, working from the Bearded Frog south and continuing on through that entire area that's been worked on. From there, later in the week, they will begin down by the Flat Bridge and start working their way back toward the Four Corners. As we all know, that work on the Four Corners continues. The entire project has been much more complicated than anyone ever anticipated. When you start digging in the ground, you start finding things you didn't know were there, or you didn't know they would be there. Water lines, drainage, in addition to the sewer lines and the sewer service lines that aren't always where they were supposed to be. So contractors doing their very best. We all know we're up against a short timeline with regard to seasonality and weather. But the paving will begin tomorrow, and we are committed to getting that done for everyone's benefit before complete season.
Thank you, Lee. Any discussion, comments? Sarah?
I'd like to say that the crew doing it are doing a fantastic job, because I have to go through there to work every morning, and they are so good about making sure I can get out of my driveway. And they just, the people who do the directing of the traffic are just so polite and nice, and I think sometimes people in such a hurry, they forget that they have a job
Thanks, Sarah. Susan, you want to add something to that, or?
No, they're great.
Okay.
Ditto.
People have been able to get to us, right?
Well, we won't have to travel south on the northbound lane going going home I guess for a while. Yeah, but yeah, we recognize that's been a pretty major effort, and I think by Lee and all of the town staff involved, well handled. I mean, I think they've handled the situation as well as it could be, and we owe them a vote of thanks as well. Anything else?
Just, I thank everyone in the community for your extreme patience during this challenging time.
Any other comment? Hearing none. Next item is to confirm our offer of, a conditional offer of employment as town manager to Lee Krohn. This is occasioned by the fact that we have made that offer following an extensive executive session, and this is a formal vote which confirms it. We have later tonight, as you may see on the agenda, an executive session regarding the terms of the offer and negotiations of it. But this simply formally confirms the board extension of a conditional offer to Lee Krohn of employment as town manager to Lee Krohn. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Mary moves,
Second.
and Jamie seconds. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it unanimously. And we congratulate you and welcome you and double our expectations.
Thank you for your confidence.
Thank you. The next item is the Tree Advisory Committee report on the emerald ash borer, which is closer and worse than we thought.
Good evening, hello. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but remember Dutch elm disease? Losing all our ash tree, all our elm trees. We're in a similar situation now with a little bug called emerald ash borer. So the goal tonight is just to quickly give you an update as to where things are. As you know, we hadn't had it in the state for many years, but now it's come in on the eastern side of the state, and it's in the Montpelier area, and it's also now been detected in Grand Isle County. So it's not very far from here, and one of the things about determining whether it's here, oftentimes once it's discovered that the emerald ash borer is here, it could have been here for several years. And so actually the trees may already be infected. So we don't know if we're in that situation or not, but there's probably some likelihood that it's already here. So of course, Shelburne, like other communities, are all of a sudden panicking and realizing we have ash trees in our community, and what are we gonna do? In the inventory, the limited inventory that we've done so far in the immediate village area and some of the northern neighborhoods, as well as the school street neighborhoods, we've got roughly 12% of 722 trees are ash trees. And that's just in the public road rights of way and on public lands. We have a bunch right out here in this town center area. We've got a bunch over on parade ground. They were planted a lot.
I'm sorry, did you say 12% of 700 some odd trees, or 700 some odd 12%?
No, 12% of 722 trees, so roughly. There you go, thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce, we have actually other members of the committee here. So Todd Warner, Jan Gannon, and Hope Johnson. Thank you. I got the first name right anyway, I apologize, Hope. Anyway, so we've all been working on this. We've started trying to educate ourselves on the emerald ash borer and what needs to be done. We had people come and talk to us several years ago. We were like, it's not here. We're not going to worry about it right away. And probably should have been doing something then. But anyway, we're in the midst of trying to put together a management plan as to how to deal with the trees. Some of the things that we've learned so far is that once a tree is infected with emerald ash borer, to take it down can be very dangerous because it won't just come down easily like a normal tree. It can shatter and actually harm the person that's trying to take down a tree as well as other things in the area. So we've really got to be proactive. We've really got to either take trees down that are in declining health or should come down anyway because they're going to be the first ones that the emerald ash borer is going to go to, or we need to look at one option is to inoculate the trees to help protect them against the emerald ash borer. But of course, either one of those options is pretty costly. A lot of communities that have dealt with this so far in the Midwest and West and other parts of the country, there's about a 90% chance that all the trees are going to die. So without doing anything, they're seeing roughly 10% are being able to survive and keep going. So it's a pretty high mortality rate. So we really need to come up with a plan and start putting this together. The Urban and Community Forestry Program, which we've received grants from annually for quite a while, they've been very helpful to us. They have a special program this year focusing on helping communities with dealing with emerald ash borer, putting together management plans and other things. So the grants are for $2,000 each, and they've got a limited number of those. So we're going to be applying for those. We're working on a plan right now. We're working with staff from the Urban and Community Forestry Center. And Elise Shadler, who's been helping us from that organization, she's going to be coming on January 9th to our committee meeting, and we're extending the invitation to all committees within the municipality that would be interested, but it's really going to be focused on municipal management of dealing with this whole issue of emerald ash borer. So hopefully she's going to be able to help us with putting this all together. So why are we here? Why am I here? We just want to give you a heads up that, it's budget season's not far along, far away right now, and we want to be able to put together some request for some funds to start doing this work this next year in terms of trees that need to come down, that are already in poor health. We want to start doing that. We've got to put together a clear plan as to how to start doing this. We can't do this all at once, but we've got to be proactive. So, just wanted to, yes.
What degree of success does inoculation provide? You know?
100%.
Thank you. I don't have, I know it's fairly high success rate. Unfortunately, it's not just a one-time deal. You have to keep doing it yearly for, I guess, 10 years, and then you go to a lesser period of time. I think it's every couple of years after that. So it depends on the diameter of the tree as to what the cost will be for that injection. I think it was like $80 to $150 per tree. So there's a cost associated.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly the trees that we feel are important, significant, specimen trees that we'd like to keep, we'd like to be proactive and start treating those, and then ones that are not that way. Again, we're only dealing with the trees within public rights of way or on public property, but one of the things we want to do as well is get the word out to residents and business owners that this is a serious issue, and if you've got an ash tree in your property or on your yard, you've really got to look at it and start trying to do something about it.
Josh, you want to comment?
Yeah, is there some way of sort of coordinating what the town is doing with what residents can do as well? Is there some economy of scale in dealing with some of these things once people recognize what is involved?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer for that. We can look into that. Right now, there's a few arborists who are trained and certified to be able to do these inoculations. So I don't have an idea yet of whether there's any economy of scale, but we can look into that.
That's a good point.
Thank you much.
Right.
We'll,
I promise I'll come back with some face next time, but I just wanted to give you a heads up.
in time for the holidays, baby.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to the committee. Thank you much. Next item is the Natural Resources Committee funding request for open space conservation projects. And Gail is here.
So, thanks for having us here tonight. This project that we're looking at is one that's unusual in a way, because generally when we come to you for conservation requests, we've been working on the project for 5 or 6 years, and there have been negotiations and ups and downs. This one is one that has come about very quickly. I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but the Natural Resources Committee for many years has had as a mission to be able to protect the shorelines of the La Platte River for a number of reasons, and I'll get into that as we go through this. And I've sent you a proposal that you had an opportunity to read. This is just a summary sort of PowerPoint that goes through some of the points of that proposal, and I hope it's something that we can work together on by the end of the evening. And I'd just like to introduce Bart Frisbee, who is the developer of the land, who is who has offered us the opportunity to purchase one of 4 lots that are being developed by him. 3 of those lots are going to be dedicated to producing 2-unit condos. And the 4th lot was to remain empty, but at the behest of the landowners, so it would have been common land. The land has 550 feet of shoreline, and it's right on Irish Hill Road, right to the east of the La Platte River Bridge. The 4th lot consists of 2.53 acres. It's also, this is not the way I'm.
You want me to advance? I'm happy to.
Yeah, you can advance. So it's the northernmost lot of this 4-lot subdivision, and it's north of the La Platte River Bridge. It's directly facing the overlook, which we've had donations for many years ago, and which is on the trails of the La Platte River Nature Park. It abuts town-owned land on the east that came with the Rivercrest development, and it's also very close to the garden side common lands. So because the Natural Resources Committee has had this mission of protecting the land along the shoreline of the La Platte, this is just another piece that begins to finish that protection. The land has an economic value of about $183 on that, $183,000 on that particular lot that is not being developed, that would have been common land. And the idea of Mr. Frisbee had been that this would be common land that would be at the behest of the landowners. However, after talking with the Natural Resources Committee and discussing what the values of the property are, Mr. Frisbee came up with the idea of offering it to us at a bargain sale price of $20,000. So it's a really significant bargain for the town to be able to accomplish this in very short order, because the project itself is in the DRB process right now, and I believe the state is that they're in discussions and would probably make a final decision at their next meeting. So we can go on. This is a map of the project that shows, Jean, do you have one of those pointers? The lot 4 is that larger portion of the lot right there. The river travels along. There are 550 feet of shoreline along the river. And in a couple of minutes, we'll have another slide. Falls Road is on the left, and Irish Hill, yeah. So the three different two-unit homes would be there, and then that large property behind would be the land that would be conserved. So what are the conservation values of this property? Our concern has been around the La Platte River. The La Platte River, as we all know, goes right to Lake Champlain. It's a commitment of the towns by federal mandate to help clean up Lake Champlain. And our concern in seeing development along the river here has been that any erosion or any dumping that might come onto the land would be subject to falling into the river and polluting the river. In addition, the La Platte is home to the endangered stone catfish. That's something that we have already done some protection of when we've protected the land at the Zen Center. And we've been concerned about it going on through. There have been some other kinds of natural resource mitigations that have happened for other kinds of invasive kind of species along the river as well. And then Mr. Frisbee had an environmental report done at the request of the Natural Resources Committee on Lot 4. And I've given you some quotes from the report of the Gilman and Briggs environmental consultants who noted that this, while this is not an absolutely unique ecosystem, the importance of the land is that it is right on the La Platte River, that it supports the overlook viewscape and the La Platte River natural area viewscape. It's also, together with the other lands that we've already conserved, it provides a lot of beautiful trails that people in Shelburne have often said that they value in surveys as we've done them over the course of the years. It also extends the shoreline buffer that we've already created and hope to be able to extend further. And it protects that 550 feet of shoreline that I had already referred to. So here, this map that you see here shows the other lands that are conserved around this particular lot. And it just gives a sense, it's hard to see the color designation, but actually read them. Just
So the pink is,
point out to you which.
yeah, the pink is publicly owned, so that would include the parcel the town acquired with the Rivercrest project as well as the Platte Nature Park. The light green is land under an easement, so that would include, as an example, the Lisarog property up the hill where there's a Vermont Land Trust easement. The dark green is land owned by a private conservation organization. So up to the northwest corner, the darker green, that's owned by the Nature Conservancy.
And so you can see how, as we go forward, we're trying to move that conservation up the river as much as we can. And that just kind of gives you the context of the whole thing. Shelburne is really under a lot of development pressure. There has been in the writing of the new town plan, which you haven't acted on yet, but which I've been at many meetings to discuss, a lot of interest on the part of the Planning Commission to be able to continue the protection of our rural lands and of our water quality, of our forested land, and also our agricultural lands. So this sort of fits into the picture. It's not something that we're pulling out of the air. And it just has a very strategic location in terms of what we've done before. So finally, I don't know that anybody is here from the PATS committee, but the PATS committee has long talked about having a circumlocuting pathway that would go around the river, and there are many paths now that are there. This would just be another element that would help to complete that. So it's our view that $20,000 is a small price to pay for that. In most cases, when we do conservation, we're dealing with properties with much higher value and generally partner with a land trust or another community organization. This is one that we can actually do ourselves with the funds that have been set aside by the community because they want to protect our lands. So for that reason, I ask you for an allocation of $20,000 from the Open Space Fund, which we would like to call the Conservation Fund. That'll come in another meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Gail.
You're welcome.
Is there any discussion in the public? Any discussion amongst ourselves?
Yeah, I just have just trying to clarification. On the larger map 5, there's, you know, in the easement or the public land part, there is a pink section that goes alongside the lots to the bridge. Is that just the plat itself, or is there any land associated with that?
There is,
Philip Black runs through.
that's a portion of the land that the town owns that is crossed by the driveway that goes to the so-called Laux property.
On the
It's on the
west side of the, okay. Because I was just wondering if there's been any consideration given that and given this about, as Gail was saying, protecting the shoreline, of either having, and I don't know if this is part of what Bart is considering, or the paths, having an easement along the shoreline, that would make that whole trail thing meet the bridge there.
There will be a drive that goes by the 3 sets of 2 units. I'm not sure if that's what you're
No, I'm talking right along the river edge.
right along the river edge will be the back edge of the houses themselves.
Right.
However, interestingly and ironically, I think with natural resource concern, that part of the land is very much populated by invasive species, and it was the recommendation of both the Gilman and Briggs report and of members of the Natural Resources Committee that there be a no-cut zone there, rather than removing the invasive species and taking a chance that other things might not grow up and that there could be erosion there, as we often see it along the edges of the lake. That there is definitely going to be a no-cut zone behind these homes, and Mr. Frisbee has agreed to that.
Okay. I mean, that's what I'm sort of wondering, you know, how to protect that shoreline area.
Yeah, we were most concerned about that too, and this seemed like the best compromise that we could come to in terms of being able to protect that entire line. It's a piece of property that we had actually coveted for many, many, many years, but it's in the not the bylaws, but in the commitment and mission of the Natural Resources Committee that we work only with willing landowners, and there were not willing landowners at the time who could work with us to be able to protect the entire property. And so I think this compromise with Sterling and Mr. Frisbee is the best we could come by, and I think it gives us access to land that, if it were under the control of the landowners, as it might have been had it been common land, could have been used for anything. It could have been used for dumping. It could have been cleared, put in a basketball court, and we would have had no control and no access to be able to monitor it. So this seems like the best of world that we can come to, and we're grateful to Sterling for offering the bargain sale to us.
Is there any other comment? Mr. Stowe?
Mr. Frisbee, but before you take his comment, I don't think I have a conflict of interest, and I don't know if we need a motion on this, but I was chair of the DRB when the matter came before us for approval. Don't think it's a conflict. I don't have any stake in the outcome, and I feel I can be impartial, but I did want to bring that to everyone's attention.
It wouldn't seem to me that that's an enduring problem, no. Thank you for, would you like to comment?
Yes,
Thank you.
I'm Bart Frisbee from Sterling Homes, and Mr. Dean asked the question about access to get back towards Irish Hill Road and the bridge. And so part of this proposal would be that we would grant public pedestrian access down our road, which will be called Mill River Lane, that would connect that open space back to Irish Hill Road, so that people could walk, make that connection.
Oh, good, that's very reassuring.
right,
And
that's
you'd be
great.
willing to
Thank you.
publicize that with a signage and?
Yes, yes. There's not room for cars or parking, but walking,
Walk in.
that would be there. And we will be installing a sidewalk along Irish Hill Road, so that when they got to Irish Hill Road, there'd be a sidewalk that will get you as far as the bridge until the bridge gets crossed. There's a little gap there, but that's coming, I think. So.
Well, yeah, that's part of the.
Well, that's what I wanted to know, if you know, Mr. Frisbee. I know that every time I go down there, I worry because it's narrow and there's a curve and there's a need for a sidewalk, but there's not a lot of buffer room between the edge of the road and property, right? Or in the private property.
So you're talking about the sidewalk along parallel to Irish Hill Road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And that sidewalk will actually kind of weave partially on town land and partially on our land with an easement to the town.
excellent.
As it goes around catch basins and things, fire hydrants.
Yeah,
We figured out a way to get it there.
great,
Great.
because I know that there's going to be sidewalk because we got a grant for that, right? That goes from Thomas?
Yeah.
And it'll come,
Thomas down.
yeah. And every time I drive by, I look and there's just, it looks kind of hard to do.
We've got our section figured out.
Thank you, Mr. Frisbee.
Thank you.
I know this isn't something that people normally think about, but there's no reported problems with the land or the soil? We're not inheriting land that we found out, after digging into it is contaminated with energy or fuels or anything like
No,
that, like
there
the
will-
library?
I can't say that because I haven't done any kind of study of it, and I'm not sure that a study has been done in the sense of the soils. However, if you wanted to read the Gilman and Briggs report, they spoke of, the land is lightly forested with shrubs. It's a young forest. There are some invasives. He spoke about some plant species and different kinds of herb species, none of which are noted as rare. So he just spoke of it as the quote that I gave you in the presentation, young mesic clay plain forest.
Mhm.
And so because it's been forested for such a long time, I don't think that there are any issues with contamination, but I'm not an expert.
Thank you, Gail. Lee, is a motion to approve the request appropriate, or
I believe it would be, yes.
is there one?
So
Yeah,
moved.
So moved.
Moved by Josh, seconded by Colleen. Any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Gail.
Thanks,
And
Gail.
thank you, Mr.
Thank you very
Frisbee.
much for your,
Yeah, thank you. It's great to have just a willing owner like you volunteer something like this. Like, this
Great
is
neighborliness.
fantastic.
We're
Yeah.
very appreciative.
And
Thank you. I think it will be good for the town and good for our new neighbors that live there. So we think it's a win-win.
yeah,
Thank
thank you.
Appreciate it.
And
it's
thanks to the
really-
Natural Resources Committee for being on
Right.
top of this. This is fantastic.
It's exactly what the open space fund is designed to do, so we can react quickly, and bravo. It's a relatively plain vanilla transaction in the conservation world, so we should jump on it. It's great.
Something quickly.
Right, it is nice, yeah.
Amazing.
and cheaply.
It doesn't, neither of those happen
No.
usually, having been involved
Right.
in many of these kinds of projects. Yep.
Thank you. We thank you again. Thank you, members of the committee who came and Support. The next item is a proposed conflict of interest ordinance as was vetted by Town Council. We are considering acceptance of the final draft. I'm advised by Mary that she has two very minor additions, corrections, and further to consider whether we wish to warn a public hearing. You want to let her go ahead with it?
Please.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we're at
Thank
the
you.
point where we've made some cleanup, what I consider cleanup changes. I think
And
Mary
I
may
found a
have
couple
some
more. Yeah, and I apologize.
additional tweaks, but we're sort of very close to the point where we'd like to move it forward for
Right, I
public
promise
hearing.
not to read it again after tonight.
It's okay.
Because I keep reading it and finding other things, so.
Here we
I
go.
have my latest version. We got two versions, the November 9 markup, I think, in our packet.
Yeah.
I took a clean version and made a few changes, so this, I think, is gonna be a little more, and ran out of color ink, sorry, right in the middle of
Okay.
printing.
So you took, when you say clean, you
I
accepted the changes, right?
Yes,
So that, okay,
yes.
it's okay.
Can I borrow with you, Josh? Oh, no, I've got a clean one here, sorry.
And there are copies on the table if anyone would like to see them.
Yeah, and I'll borrow with Josh. I only made 5 copies. I apologize if I'm confusing things, but I have 4 comments on the most recent draft, and I'm happy to address those at the appropriate time. If now's the appropriate time.
I
I
think
would say
unless others have comments on the previous markup, it's probably the best way to
None?
call
Josh?
it. Right, the markup
None.
that was in your packet, now we're looking at the Mary's markup.
Colleen, comments at all?
I'm just looking at this, at what she just handed us.
And I'll walk you through it, Colleen,
Okay.
if that's, everyone, if that's okay, and also to the audience. So there's a provision in the ethics ordinance that talks about application. It's Article 3. It reads, "This policy applies to all individuals elected or appointed to perform executive, administrative, legislative, or quasi-judicial functions for the town," and so on. And it talks about the people to whom this ordinance applies. But Article 1, last sentence, says the ordinance applies to all town public officials as defined in the ordinance. So we have 2 provisions telling the reader to whom this ordinance applies. I think the first one is a leftover, and therefore I would propose striking the last sentence of Article 1, because Article 3 tells us to whom the ordinance applies. So in my opinion, it's duplicative and thus confusing. And the next change I have is Article 5. It has 2 different titles. I'm just not sure we need the 2 different titles, and Article 5 is aimed more at defining what is prohibited conduct, and therefore I think this sounds like a leftover. The highlighted version states conduct that violates the ordinance and is subject to a complaint. I'm a little indifferent, but I think it's confusing to have 2 titles. Never seen that before in an ordinance, so I think one should come out. I think it should be the latter. Finally, in Article 7, we talk about the people who can bring concerns about recusal forward, and I think in a quasi-judicial proceeding, parties should be able to bring those concerns forward. So, for example, I know myself in a DRB hearing where it's a sort of a contested hearing, and you have the town, for example, arguing there's been a violation, and then you have a represented party saying, no, there hasn't. And I think a represented party, or any party, should be able to say that anyone sitting on a board appears to have a conflict of interest, and I wanted to make that clear. I wasn't sure it was clear. I'm a little indifferent on that one. I'm sorry if it's not important. But I think the change I made on Article 3 is extremely important. Article 8, sorry. Jeez. By the way, I know this falls on deaf ears for some of us on the board, but I've had a very, very, very long day, so I apologize if I'm making mistakes. On Article 8, we go to great lengths to describe what happens when someone has the appearance of a conflict of interest. But we say nothing about what happens when someone has a conflict of interest. Nothing. Except there's the last sentence of the article, which I couldn't completely figure out. So I know that we had talked about this a little bit, about whether or not someone could be forced off a commission. If the other commission or board members could say, no, 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 we're forcing you off. So I added the sentence, if a public official has an actual conflict of interest, he or she should recuse him or herself from consideration of the matter. Otherwise, Article 8 really is aimed only at conduct that is an appearance of a conflict of interest. Unless one were to read the last sentence that says, otherwise the public official shall recuse him or herself from the matter under consideration, as being independent of the sentence prior to it. So I think maybe we could strike the last sentence and add the sentence that I've suggested, because I think otherwise it's confusing and doesn't give the reader much information about what happens in the case of an actual conflict of interest. And then finally, and I'm sorry, again, Article 11, C, 3C. We don't define what personal notice is, and I think that might be something that should be defined. It doesn't tell us how the Ethics Committee gives personal notice to anyone, if it's by putting a letter in the mail or having the sheriff show up at your door or calling up on the phone, or what that means.
What if it said written notice rather than personal notice?
That would be fine.
Whether it's a letter, an email, or some documented notice to those parties.
I think that would be appropriate. Probably is the most efficient fix. But that's it, and thank you for your indulgence. Maybe what I'll do is move to see if there's, if it would be appropriate to accept my modifications as set forth in the handout I provided to you and explained just now.
Before we do that, would you, is Lee?
Yep.
Yes, right here.
He's right here in front of you.
Oh, okay. Would
He
you,
moved seats. He was sitting in the back.
would you,
Snuck up.
Sure. Lee Susskind, Chair of the Ethics Committee. Thank you for asking. First of all, the draft that Jamie provided to me a few days ago, I haven't had a chance to, I distributed it to my committee, and no committee members got back to me with any concerns, and I'm okay with the version that is here tonight. Now we have a couple of more things, and if you want, I will comment on those. I can find the right version. Okay, so I agree with the striking that last sentence of Article 1. That makes a lot of sense. It's, as Mary says, it's repeated later. No need to have that. The Article 5 prohibited conduct, the reason that it now says conduct that violates the ordinance is subject to a complaint, I agree it's not needed. It's there more to help the public to understand this is what you can file a complaint against and not other things. And that's why we had it in the first place. Now, true, in Article 11, I think, it says you can only file a complaint for a violation of that article. But no harm in having it twice, just in case any questions come up. It's more informational. I don't feel strongly if the board wants to delete that, it's fine with me.
so it's redundancy.
It's redundant, but it's in terms of making sure the public understands what this is and what this isn't, I think it would be helpful.
I think it's in the current ordinance. I'm pretty sure that was carried over from.
I don't remember.
No?
I don't remember if it was in the prior one, to tell you the truth. But that's why it's in there, because in the prior one, there, if you recall, it wasn't clear what was prohibited conduct and what was aspirational. And we got rid of all the aspirational stuff and we included the prohibited conduct. It's all here. This is what you can file a complaint for. The other stuff, it would be nice if everyone acted civilly, but it's not a violation of the ordinance to act civilly. So anyway, that's where that came from. And I don't feel strongly. I think it would be helpful if you want to get rid of it. It's fine with me. I like in Article 7 and the addition of and parties in a quasi-judicial proceeding can ask for consideration of recusal. Article 8, if the public official actually has an actual conflict of interest, he or she should recuse himself. As far as I'm concerned, it should say shall. It shouldn't say should. Should gets you nowhere. If you want to be clear, if you have an actual conflict of interest, you shall recuse, period. So I would recommend substituting shall for should if you're going to bother putting it in. And I agree with that change.
Would you strike the last sentence of Article 8 in that case as being a little confusing because it's redundant? Or is that,
well,
is the
haven't
last
really-
sentence?
Right. I
applied?
don't know if the last sentence applies to an appearance of a conflict of interest as opposed to an actual, and I haven't had a time to think that through.
I think it's supposed to apply only
Yeah,
to
I think it's-
appearance.
I don't know, I've sort of read that as, that was the mechanism to recuse, right? If there's a conflict, then the official shall recuse. Whether it's an appearance, if there's an appearance and you think it's problematic, then you recuse.
Mhm.
If there's an actual conflict, then you also recuse. So I sort of read that last sentence as
Broadly,
picking it up.
yeah.
But I have no objections to the change. I agree with Lee, it should say shall.
I
Should
agree
say
too.
shall.
And on personal notice, I think I would recommend say something like personal notice shall be given in writing, either by hand or by first-class mail, unless you want to allow email. But I think just by personal notice shall be given in writing isn't enough guidance. I would say shall be given in writing by, and make your choices.
This
In
is
hand,
notice of the
first-class
hearing,
mail, or email.
Notice of the hearing from the clerk, right?
So this is
That's what we're
notice
talking about?
of the, let me get back to.
Notice
Set
from
the hearing,
clerk
right,
to-
personal notice of the notice of the hearing, right,
Right,
exactly.
okay.
And that should be, if you want to restrict it to by hand or first-class mail, that's okay. If you want to allow email, that's up to you. Those are my thoughts. Good improvements by Jamie and Mary, and if the board adopts them, by the board.
State your motion with,
Can I just,
I'm sorry,
so
Colleen.
just on that Article 3, and, because you want to strike this last sentence, because it says in Article 3 who it applies to. And, just to clarify, it applies to all individuals elected or appointed. But it says it does not apply to employees of the town unless they are also an elected official. It does not cover anything in here if they're both. I'm assuming, so if it applies to all individuals elected or appointed, and then it goes through the rest of that sentence, and then in the very last sentence, the last phrase, it does not apply to employees of the town because the town employees are covered under an employee manual. Right? But this paragraph basically states that this does not apply to employees of the town. So what if there is an employee of the town who is also an elected official? And so the first sentence should take precedent.
I would think in construing this, it would be my reaction that it would apply to an elected official, and when you're a town employee, but you're also an elected official, there are duties you perform as an elected official that are separate from your employee duties.
You know, it doesn't accept
could be-
employees who happen to be elected or appointed
Right.
officials.
Right,
So by, you know,
So the first sentence takes precedent
yes,
over whether
Correct.
there's an employee.
would think, yeah.
that's how I would
Yeah.
construe it.
Yeah.
All
So my guess
individuals.
is, even though the duties might be separate, there's probably some overlap in a small town.
Yes.
we seem pretty much agreed, are we?
With Lee's edit, that the word should in my change be changed to shall, which I agree with.
You want to restate them, Mary, by the
Do you want me to?
removal in Article 1, the
Yes.
the
Sure.
retention in 5, and
Yep, I would move to I would make the following motion: to remove the last sentence of Article 1, to remove the second title of Article 5, to add the phrase in Article 7, and parties in quasi-judicial proceedings, and to add the sentence in Article 8, if the public official has an actual conflict of interest, he or she shall recuse him or herself from consideration of the matter. And then to add in 11C, 3C, personal notice in writing, I would say, I would go with.
notice in writing.
A written notice shall be given to each member of the Ethics Committee and to the complainant. I would be happy with written notice, as
Written
Lee
or
said.
electronic notice?
Well, written is electronic, so.
Well,
Right? That's,
We will address it in our rules, how we give notice.
there you
thanks,
go.
Lee.
You can define it in your rules. That's
Mary's
fine.
moved, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Josh. Discussion, Gail?
You were talking about a lot of wills and shalls, and in Article 5D, it's the only one of that section that has a will instead of a shall. 5D.
5B as in boy.
Public official will not request or accept any reward, gift, or favor.
Is it D?
D.
Yeah,
They're just not consistent. You'd like
yeah,
for it to be
I agree with you,
consistent.
Gail.
Good eye, Gail. We changed will to shall and D.
And there was one other thing,
I'll take that as a friendly amendment.
Yes. We heard you. We heard you mention that.
and then when it says in Article 11, B6, engage the services of the town attorney, or where the attorney has a conflict of interest, engage the services of outside legal counsel. Is there any need for determination of what constitutes a conflict of interest in that case?
I would think it would be as defined in this ordinance. Or it could be a conflict of interest as defined
think
by
the
the
firm-
ethical rules that govern the
Yeah, the
lawyer.
firm would typically make a determination if there's a conflict, so if they're conflicted out, they'll let the town, the client know,
It just,
at which point
I
we
guess-
find someone else, we, the ethics committee, find someone else.
It just has seemed to me in the past, there are occasions when the town attorney was asked to make some determinations about something that seemed conflicted.
That's it.
All right, thank you, Gail.
I mean, I can see where that might be an issue. Is there some other, any other suggestion to how to
No,
clarify that?
I'm good with where I stand.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm comfortable with it too.
But
We're
thank
so
you, Gail.
close to the finish line.
So,
Mary has amended. Josh, I think you seconded, didn't
Yep.
you? Is there any further discussion, any comment in the public? Hearing none, seeing no hands. Any further discussion amongst ourselves? Lee?
Just want to make sure in Article 8, are we still also deleting the last sentence of that paragraph?
I think it stays in,
Stays
based
in now.
on Jamie's clarification.
Okay, just wanted to be clear, thanks.
Do you
And are
have it?
we,
I was gonna provide a clean copy. if that's,
That'd be great.
if that would be easy.
Are we
Yeah.
including a date for the public hearing in the motion, or?
My assumption is we accept the draft and
And then make a separate
we
motion?
Yeah.
schedule the
Okay.
public hearing.
Good with that.
Correct?
So we have a vote, please?
Yes. Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you for all the participation.
And thank you for indulging me.
And do you want to suggest, or,
Possible dates, looking at all the various elements coming before us, could be December 11 or December 18.
what's your recommendation?
Either one works. If you
Do you
want to
have
do
a
it sooner,
preference, Lee?
go for the 11th and hopefully
Sooner,
get it done.
probably than later.
I know there's,
11th okay with all of us? Is there a motion to that effect?
Yeah,
Whoop.
December 11th.
Yeah, you'll miss it, yeah.
The 18th. And, I mean, we've been dealing with this for a long time. Is there any reason to not wait for January for this? Just
Can you-
because it's 2 more weeks?
can certainly do that too.
This has been a huge collaborative effort.
We could.
The sooner the better.
Mhm.
But it's your decision.
Seems like we have a lot going on.
I mean, I'm fine with that. It'd be nice to get it over the finish line. My sense is the public hearing may be underwhelming
Yeah,
for this because we've spent so much time
I agree.
Let's,
in
let's
session
hope.
deliberating this, but I could be wrong. So
I'd like to finish it in the same year we began it.
I'm happy to wait. I don't feel,
I will say that one of the joys of doing this work is we had major participation from about 10 people at many of our meetings to help us to draft an improved ordinance. Many of those people are in the room tonight. So as Jamie says, I would be surprised if the public hearing were overwhelming.
Thanks, Lee. With that, the 18th doesn't help you either, does it? No. Well, I'm going to favor the 11th, Colleen, and we'll manage as best we can to keep you advised. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Josh moves,
second.
seconded by Jamie. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Those favoring the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay.
Nay.
It's 4-1 with Colleen voting against, and is that, that's agreeable with you, Lee, right?
Yes.
Yep, thank you. And thank you, Lee, and I have to thank the committee that worked so hard and so long and so diligent, and as someone, quite an amateur in most of this, it was a very instructive period for me personally. I thought the discussions were of aspirational versus prescriptive were really golden plate in terms of locals doing their thing for their community. So we can't thank you enough.
Yeah, I agree. I hope we can let your committee take a breather over the holiday and then re-engage on the aspirational guidelines discussion and sort of the other 2.0 activities.
Excellent. And I appreciate your comments.
And
Thanks.
just want to
Thanks.
extend a thank you to Jamie and Mary for taking on the additional responsibilities and undertaking all that extra time to go to all those committee meetings and make sure that everybody was on a similar page.
Thank you.
Yeah, they were
Happy
an
to do it.
enormous help to us, the rest of us. I mean, we can't thank them either enough, so. Thank you. Next item is Library's Town Center Project Complications and Costs. We're privileged to have Ruth and Kathy as well to join in at some point. Lee, do you want to
Sure.
lead this off?
Thank you. So as everyone knows, we are well underway with the Library Town Center project. And as you may also know, anytime you start doing major excavation into the ground or start doing work on an older building, as anyone who's ever tried to renovate even a home of half the age of our historic town hall knows, things get more complicated than ever might have been anticipated. And I'll put these into categories. First one relates to soils. Even though test borings were done to determine the structural suitability of the soil, you still couldn't bore through the floor of the library. So we had no idea how much soil would have to be removed and how much new fill would have to be brought back in order to support the new building. So that was one major complication. Everyone has seen the mountain out back that is now mostly gone, thank goodness. We were able to find a home for it. The other part of the soils that was not anticipated was petroleum contamination. We knew there were tanks in the ground back there, but the tanks were removed at some point in the past, and there was no evidence of leakage. In fact, those tanks were reused at another location. So we didn't expect to find significant amounts of petroleum contamination. When you find that, you have to take certain actions in order to protect it, stabilize it, not have it leak further into the environment, get it tested, and then find a home for it. And those things all cost money. So that was a second complication that we encountered. Getting on to the historic town hall. The original plan was to simply remove and replace the bricks on the front entry porch. When those bricks were removed, we discovered that the concrete foundation under it was pretty much rotten, and there's all sorts of mixed rubble and fill in there. So that all had to get removed in order to replace those steps. The old railings were rotten because of moisture that gathered into the brick where they were inserted into that. We found problems with one or two of the columns, and several of the bases, the wooden bases, were rotten. So all these things relate to the nature of construction when you have wood sitting on masonry and moisture gathers there. Again, anyone who's ever started to take apart a house knows how these things can tumble in a hurry. The cupola as well has become a much more complicated project than anticipated. And when you're in there, you can't walk away from it. There are certain things you finally need to do to stabilize it. None of these things were anyone's fault. They're just part of owning an old building. The fire station, when there used to be one alarm panel serving all of these buildings over there, but according to current codes, when you remove an old fire alarm panel, you now need to add new panels. So the library, historic town hall needs a panel, and the fire station now needs its own panel. Temporarily, we have one panel moved to the fire station that used to be in the library, serving all of them, and the fire marshal will let us keep that in place until the new project's completed. At that point, that panel needs to be replaced, and the new panel needs to go in the new building. And the concrete apron in front of the firehouse, which is starting to fail, if we were just keeping everything as it is, we could let it go. But because we are milling and repaving the entire access drive and parking lot in front of the campus over here, to make sure the grades work, that concrete apron needs to be replaced. So there's no time to do it like when you're redoing all of the structural elements of the driveway and the parking lot. So those things all add up to a fair bit of money, none of which was originally contemplated. We also have a request from the Highway Superintendent, Paul Goodrich, that if we are repaving the driveway into this campus and the parking lot on that side, he's hoping we would also allocate funding to repave the parking lot on this side in front of the town offices, so that when we're done, at the end of the day, it's all one consolidated whole. It looks nice, it functions well, it works well. A couple other costs that were incurred along the way or have not yet been, but an additional fire hydrant was added into the project. That turned into something that was, you'd think that would be simple, but it turned into a much more complicated permitting process with the state and expense that was not originally contemplated. And then we will need a new wayfinding sign out by the road for the entire new campus. And it was felt that perhaps that also should be what I'll call a town or municipal expense and not necessarily a library or project expense. So in summary, if all of these things happen, and many of them need to happen, because, for example, the soils and the petroleum contaminated soils, we just have to take care of those things. It's a big number. It's almost $250,000. But it seemed timely, to bring you up to date on this constellation of issues, concerns, and complications, and determine a course of action.
So all these costs that you're talking about would be wrapped into the library budget per se, or is it being suggested this would come out of other town funds?
The suggestion is to consider to add these into the capital improvement plan and budget, the hearing for which will come next, and that's why we put this first as a prelude to having that larger conversation
But
outside of the project budget.
and why would that be, since as you said, these are all issues that are associated with the construction project itself. So why wouldn't it continue to be part of that construction budget rather than, which has already been approved as the library town project budget? It seems odd that you would now want to move it into the the CIP budget. I'm just trying to understand the rationale there.
No, very fair question. The rationale is that when the project was built, when the project was designed and the budget was built, it didn't contemplate virtually any of these expenses. It didn't contemplate the significant expense for the soil and the fill, didn't contemplate the petroleum contamination. There were, for example, with the soils, there was $17,000 in the budget to deal with removal of some soil, adding in fill. But that doesn't come close to what was actually needed. There was a number of roughly $20,000 contemplated for the cupola. We're now looking at closer to $40,000 to repair that properly. So these things have started to cascade in ways that were never anticipated a year or 2 years ago when the project was designed and the budget was built.
But why does that, I mean, to me, it seems more logical to keep like things alike. And so, as you said, these are unknown, these are things that happen in almost every construction project. I'm not saying that they're not at all needed, but it seems to me that just from an accounting standpoint, or just for knowing, being able to say, okay, the library town center project cost X, and we've already, and the public has already approved that for that purpose. I would prefer keeping all of those costs in that one pot and saying that's where it goes, rather than separating it out just because it wasn't something you knew about. It's still part of that construction project.
I would disagree a little bit, Josh, because I think you have to recognize the magnitude here. This is $250,000, which in any budget, even of a $6.5 million project, is going to have difficulties dealing with. And further, the project itself has already made sacrificial cuts, call them, to provide for some of these unexpected costs. Cuts that have to do with shelving, with floor covering, with pretty essential matters at this point. Any absorption of $250,000 is going to have a very serious impact on the library. If you'll let me finish.
Yeah, that's fine.
There are a number of ways to deal with this cost, which I assume Lee has presented to us as a starter. First of all, there are 2 fiscal years involved. Some of these costs can be paid in the 1920 fiscal year. There are questions of whether some of these costs represent capital improvements to such as the volunteer fire department and ought to be considered in their budget specifically. There are other considerations that I expect would be our next step, which is to sketch out what the capacity of the project is to absorb costs of this magnitude, and if they did, what would the cost be to other items, furnishings, and of the library. Which of these could be considered capital investment by various departments and thus allocated to them, which of these could cross the fiscal year. But I think you'll find when we have that discussion that absorbing $250,000 is going to have a material, a negative material impact on the library project.
And I appreciate that, but on the converse, I think you could make the same case that it could have a considerable material effect on the town's budget.
Oh, there's no question about that.
And so I'm not sure
Yeah.
it seems to me it makes more sense to keep it, keep the costs involved in a project with that project. I can see the firehouse is a possible exception to that.
Yeah.
But I think trying to separate out one from the other, I'm not sure. I think just from an accounting, from a public understanding of what it is, it just seems like sort of moving things out of one pot and into another. And I don't understand.
Well, from my experience with the committee, and it certainly can await a following meeting where we discuss this in some detail, I don't see how reasonably the project in its current funding can absorb these unexpected additional costs.
Can I add to that? There might be a more positive way to look at this, Josh. I had the same reaction you did when I reviewed these numbers. They're big, but I don't think anyone could have anticipated the contaminated soil, and I, for one, think it's great to get contaminated soil out from underneath.
Absolutely.
I think the same is true with our, and let's not forget, historic town hall. It's a historic building. And I'm glad that we found these problems because they were, I think, kind of progressive. I mean, I was just trying to put a positive spin on it. I mean, these are defects in a historic building in our town that should be repaired. So, my initial reaction was, why the heck didn't the library committee know all this stuff? That was my gut reaction. And then when I, thought about it a little bit and drilled down a little bit, the first two problems, I think, are problems that couldn't have been foreseen and needed to be fixed. And in a way, I'm going to guess, it's just a guess, that the repairs to the historic town hall are repairs that are probably saving us money in the long run before maybe more damage. So I'm feeling a little bit better about it. I was surprised that the fire panel cost was there, that couldn't be anticipated. And as well, the $40,000 for the town campus site, that too seems to me to have been something that could be anticipated. But that's 80 of the 240, so I was feeling a little bit better when I put that kind of spin on it, thought about it in those terms. So.
And can I also say something too? Is there certain things when the committee first met and it was decided to not just build a new library? Do you want to say something now? Oh, okay. If when we first when there was the discussion about building a new library, it was where's the library going to be? Just move out of that space into an entirely new building, and the decision to keep the library where it was, but detach from the existing town hall. It wasn't to leave the town hall kind of just flying in the wind. It was to restore it to the point of being able to be used. But there's things that are kind of getting piggybacked on to the project. Whether Paul Goodrich wants the rest of the town center area to be paved, there's no way that the library steering committee would have anticipated that or planned on it. Or the cupola reconstruction or the columns, none of these things were considered because they weren't supposed to be considered. Now, as a town, as a select board, we have to consider them because they're all of our problem. But as far as being anticipated by the steering committee, it wasn't really the charge to the steering committee by either the select board or the board of trustees.
I just had a question on the contingency line item, what that looks like, and
That's a good point.
Yeah, I believe it's roughly a $70,000 contingency that we have carried. So some of these costs could potentially be carried by that to lessen what additional expense if we were to go down that route, but it clearly won't cover it all.
Again, I think, Chris.
that feels low. I mean, it is what it is. That feels low on a $6 million project.
Yeah.
Again, my sense is we're being introduced to the problem. And we have an opportunity to meet at our next meeting to discuss alternative ways of meeting these expenses.
We do.
I wouldn't anticipate, Josh, that it's just a wholesale, switch the bag to a different hand. There are elements in here that could well wait until 1920, for instance, the town campus site. But I think the important thing is that we're being introduced to the magnitude of this problem. It's a serious one. And I would expect at our next meeting, the committee as well as Lee will have some specific recommendations, possibly with Peter's help, as to how to distribute these costs, which we definitely have to address, and then how to distribute them.
I think Jamie raises a really good point. There should be at least a 10 to 20% contingency built into the
Yeah, I mean,
cost.
I
Not
think-
that these necessarily should fall into that, I don't know, but for our next meeting, I'd be curious to know what that number is, or
And
how-
he said
And
it's
how it's
70.
been used.
But he's saying for the whole project, but that's just that the city or the town built in, right? Didn't,
The GMP should have
It
a
should have, yeah.
contingency.
I just don't
And
remember.
it's 70?
Yeah, I believe on our side it's roughly 70, and the contractor has built in some level of contingency, but they get to
Right.
control where that gets
Yeah, where they use it.
Yeah.
used.
and this wouldn't be these things aren't part of the contractor's problem, so
Right,
there
it's
are
outside of
problems.
scope.
This,
Yeah.
this became the proverbial, you start touching one thing
Yeah.
and discover more and more and more that we're not.
And am I being overly optimistic to think that this is probably not
No.
it, but
No.
that's
You
what,
are
you know,
being
when
Overly,
you,
Yes.
yes, you're being overly optimistic.
okay. Well, because there's not much more.
Yeah.
I guess. All right, never mind.
Well, we have stopped digging and we have started to build, so the
That's the good
fondest
news.
hope of all involved is that we won't find much more.
Did Chris have a comment?
Good thought, Mary. All right, Chris, you want to comment?
Sir, I do. Thank you. Chris Boyd, Delamis Road. And I will say, I'm trying to contain my frustration. I wasn't in favor of a $6.5 million project to begin with. I think there was a more sensible way to do that. That's all water over the dam. But after the bond vote, to find out that the design professionals in this project did not even have any kind of preliminary discussions with any kind of agencies that had any oversight in this to see, were they missing something? And find out they were. And we can talk about the old town hall as one part and the cupola wasn't part of the scope of the project. But did the design professionals pull in anybody who had historic preservation experience to look at some of the other components of that building? When you jack a building or when you support a building the way that's being supported, it's going to shift forces in that old building. Things are going to happen. Somebody with some experience in some older buildings other than an architect should have had some input on that. And if they didn't, sorry, it is part and parcel of this whole project. This project has a budget. And if the budget wasn't designed and built on solid numbers, then it's all muck anyways. You can't take and rob Peter to pay Paul. I agree. Paving the rest of the parking lot out of that project, if it wasn't part of it, probably not the right place to get the money. Because the front ramp on the fire department has to be replaced because of the paving, probably is the right place for that money to come from. Why should that come out of the fire department budget when it wasn't going to be disturbed if this hadn't been done? They wouldn't have to repair it, but it's part of this project. You gotta look at the whole thing and put the budget where it belongs with this project. And as a taxpayer, it bothers me because this just keeps digging deeper and deeper. And when it comes to budget session this year, the town really needs to start looking at needs and wants. what is mandated by statute and charter for this town to do, and anything that doesn't fall into that needs to really be microanalyzed, and do we put this off? Because this money pit is gonna hang on us for a long time.
Thank you, Chris. Susan?
I agree with Chris. Susan McClellan, Falls Road. The library project was not a favorite of mine. I know we did need some help. Deferred maintenance is something that this town really seems to thrive on. And then when we have to do something, it's millions of dollars. A lot of these things, if the project had been voted down, wouldn't have needed doing anyway, except for just renovations of the library that we have. I think we have a budget, and I think it needs to be stuck to. When we renovated our homes, we have a budget. If something comes up, something else needs to be cut out. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Sean?
Sean Moran, Lakeview Co-op, to be soon. I guess I'm the third to echo this. You have a very wary town now. We bought a fire truck. The library passed with a very slim attendance to vote and a very slim margin that it passed, meaning a lot of us thought it was not a needed project. I'm not saying the renovations, but the new library. And we're still paying for the railroad lawsuit. So, for the one that passed, not the appeal. You've got a town that's, we don't have a pot of gold like some of the people who live on the Shelburne farm. A lot of us have a couple homes. We're being hit in a lot of ways. I agree. I don't know how, when I'm sure the library committee worked extremely hard to get the right design people and the right architects and the right construction people. They don't foresee some of this stuff. When I hire a lawyer to do a search on a property I'm buying, I want that lawyer to find all the pitfalls that can come up. When I hire a director, I want that director to know the costumes are going to be more, the sets are going to be more. I want a construction company that says, wait a minute, this building is this old, and the columns have sat on the cement, and we better build in a bigger fringe here so that to take care, because something's going to happen. The soil is going to be rough. If there were tanks on there, couldn't we possibly think, oh, well, maybe they would have leaked? I mean, it seems like it was rushed into, not in any committee's fault, but maybe by the architects, maybe by the construction company, to not foresee some of the stuff and not build it into their budget. So now the town we have to pay another $250,000 to finish this. Yes, I want the town hall. I want to be able to perform the town hall. Library was fine, so that didn't bother me. And I wasn't a voter for the new library. I just think we have to stop going to that pot of gold, because that pot of gold right now is a pile of bills. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Linda?
Linda Reel, Falls Road. I'm doubly frustrated right now because I'm going through a personal home renovation project. And with my local contractor, we spent extensive time going over what my budget was, what I was going to be able to afford, and what types of things could possibly come up in my little 1950s building as they dug up the foundation and pulled things down. And yes, we found surprises. And yes, I had to give up some of the things that I wanted in my renovation on a small scale. But I stick to my budget, and that's what I would expect from the town in their large-scale project.
Thank you, Linda. Tom?
Tom Duncan's Falls Road. Figured I'd put my 2 cents in, but we've got this this match, you know, people have been donating money, and looks like a good portion of it is, well, I guess they'll match all of it. So there's some potential additional funds. I mean, one way or the other, the taxpayers are going to have to foot the bill. So maybe just use what we were hoping would reduce our bill and put it toward the cost.
Thank you, Tom. Vivian?
Vivian Jordan, Lakeview Co-op, to be. Simple observation, there are maybe, 7,800 people in this town? That's a big burden, any of this, to just, throw these numbers around. We've got the railroad thing to pay for, and now $6 million library. That's a lot of money for a little bit of people. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. Any other comment? Tom?
Thomas Murphy. With respect to the soils, I read the article in the newspaper, so that's my only knowledge of it. Very common. The state classifies it as urban fill. Fully understand it. That although these aren't foreseen costs, that classification saves money in disposal. The rest of it's going to New York, a facility I'm very familiar with, probably ESMI, thermal absorption facility. With our location in the state, that's where it should go. My question is, and you may not have the answers, but if the excavation of the contaminated soils encountered groundwater, then that triggers a whole other round of state requirements, specifically the installation of groundwater monitoring wells to determine the extended magnitude of potential contaminants that leach from the soil into the ground, into groundwater. So I don't know that detail, if groundwater was encountered during the excavation. The second is, if excavation of contaminated soils doesn't remove all the soils, which are confirmed by confirmatory lab samples, then another concern is vapor intrusion, another program that the state has. Meaning, if we can't get all that contaminated soil out, there is always going to be the likelihood of those petroleum constituents to volatilize and migrate into buildings. And there's technologies and systems to manage that, but it's not cheap. So maybe a little homework: was groundwater encountered during the excavation of the soils, and were all impacted soils removed, eliminating that risk of soil vapor intrusion?
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Any other comments? My sense is that we're in a two-step. This is the initial, and that our expectation would be that you'll come back at our next meeting with some recommendations as to how and where these can be paid, if they are to be, and in some sufficient detail that we can come to some conclusions, because some of these have immediate, we need to address them fairly soon. Is that agreeable to all of us? We thank you, and those of you who've commented, we'll be back November 27th to take it up again with full stomachs and a lot of appetite for the discussion. We thank you very much. Next item is a public hearing on the CIP, that is the Capital Improvement Plan and Budget. And we'll defer to Peter, who will lead us.
This is the third meeting that we've had discussing the capital improvement plan. And just again to briefly summarize what it is and why we do it. It is a 6-year plan starting with the current fiscal year and the following 5 years of capital projects. The projects that are in years 2 through 6 are not funded. The ones that are in this year's budget are funded, subject to the availability of grants. This particular version has over 100 projects in it, ranging from highway trucks to town center and those types of building projects. And again, the funding, just because it's in the capital plan, again, does not mean that it's going to take place. Actual funding takes place either by including it in the operating budget each year or by a separate bond vote, as with the library and town center project. So just again, to emphasize, the projects in this first year will take place, the year we're in right now, subject to grants availability, and projects in years 2 through 6 are not funded at this point and would be subject to change. Why do we do the capital improvement plan? Again, it's an annual process that we go through. It's really to try to take a longer term view of what projects are coming down the road, and then to have a process for prioritizing and implementing them. Projects come and go as we change it each year, and you'll find projects come in some years and they're taken out in other years. And again, the purpose of the plan, again, with that longer term view, is to try to plan so that we don't have large fluctuations in the property tax or water sewer rates in the same time. To try to manage those large projects so that they don't coincide with projects in other areas. And then another reason we do it is by statute, in order to charge impact fees for projects that are growth related. Those impact fees can only be charged on projects that are included in the capital budget that's been approved. And currently we do have impact fees for playing fields, bike ped paths, and the CVU expansion that took place several years ago. And also it can help if you're trying to get a grant for a project to have it be part of the adopted capital improvement plan. It means it's been vetted and that there is a priority to that project. This particular version in total over the 6-year period has $28.2 million worth of projects. You can see the breakdown here between general fund projects, stormwater, which you're now familiar with as we've heard numerous times, and then the water and sewer funds. So those are the main categories of breakdown in this plan. The statute provides that we submit the capital plan to the Planning Commission, give them an opportunity to comment on it. And for the first time since I've been working with it, the Planning Commission did actually submit comments, which we appreciate. Those were included with the package on the website. Some of the items that the Planning Commission pointed out would be one that we do have a lot of bike ped projects in town. But one thought that was put up was, what about looking at how they connect to each other, and what about connecting to other communities, not just Shelburne-only projects? So there's a suggestion to include at least a study to look at the feasibility of connecting some of those projects to others in town or with adjacent communities. And that was included, a $40,000 project. Again, that would probably be 80% grant funded. Also, as Mary brought up at one of our previous meetings, and the Planning Commission also expressed interest in it, is to have an item for solar energy in the capital improvement plan. Whether it's design or looking at solar arrays or whatever, at least to put it on our radar screen as something that we're planning for and would be willing to allocate funding for, because there definitely is some opportunities here with the town buildings to have those sorts of projects. And then also the idea of, again, the priority with the town plan and with planning commission discussions and others is to develop our town-wide bike ped corridor. The project that we've got going up Irish Hill that was mentioned earlier tonight. Those have been priorities. We've done a lot of them, and there are other areas to connect those. And the planning commission, I think, would through the town plan would encourage continuation of those types of analysis. Another item that came up that I thought was interesting and worthy of consideration is to include an item for the open space fund. Acquiring land is considered a capital project. So it came through the open space committee, conservation committee is their new name, to include those types of things in there. It might help us gauge how much do we put aside, rather than saying, well, is it 30, is it 20,000, what is it each year? And certainly we're not proposing that you have actual projects that are identified, but maybe a sense of the committee is if we had this much money, we could acquire this sort of thing. So certainly, and that's not something we would probably have time to do for this version, but down the road, I think it would be worthy to consider open space projects as part of the capital improvement plan. So just in general, the priorities in here are existing infrastructure, nothing new, stormwater, the Monroe Brook flow restoration plan, you've heard about that. That's definitely going to be impacting us for the next 5 years. In the wastewater department, as you've heard from Chris Robinson, the existing plant is close to 20 years old since its last rehab. Equipment is wearing out. Chris is looking at whether or not to do a consolidation study with the two plants or with South Burlington. But in the meantime, we're still going to have a collection system with pumps on it that operate 24/7, and he's looking at continuing to upgrade those and to look at parts of the collection system, as was done with the Summers project, where we've had infiltration issues, and to look at replacing those lines. In the water department, same story as water departments across the country are experiencing. You have old lines that break. That's when you have the water breaks, and people go through that process. And again, with looking at that, the superintendent, Rick Lewis, has developed a priority of areas where he would like to see lines replaced. Again, they're going to be failing, and as with any system throughout the country, you're seeing aging water systems are looking at developing plans to do some replacements. Other priorities, kind of in two categories. Existing facilities, we're starting to see some maintenance needs for this building. It was renovated a number of years ago, but now roof replacement, carpet wearing out, trim needing to be repainted. The Pearson building, where the Jimmy Two-Coat store is, that needs maintenance, repainting and so forth. We did the column bases this summer, but again, if you talk to the tenants there, that's an old building and needs some energy improvements and things like that. The historic town hall, we talked about that already. Davis Park building down there, again, needs some maintenance. And then the category of new facilities. We've already talked about the library tonight, but the Recreation Committee was in several meetings ago talking about a need for replacing the beach house. Also in the category of equipment, in the public safety category, you'll see with police, fire, and rescue, all are proposing upgrades to their equipment. Emergency service equipment is upgraded continuously with new technology, and it makes sense to stay in touch with that for the response to be responsive to the calls, and also for the volunteers and employees that are employed in that area to have the right tools and equipment. And also to look at, given the kind of the crowding with the town center area, does it make sense to have the fire station here? Rescue is in an older building. You can see that if you look at the details, they're looking at a lot of improvements there to energy improvements and so forth. Does it make sense to put money towards those buildings, or look at a possible emergency service facility that both could be operating out of? And then, as we said before, the bike ped projects, again, a priority to continue focusing on those. So that's just kind of a quick overview of where we are. We've gone through it. The details are all there, but I think those are kind of the general categories. Again, this is not a commitment to do these projects, but again, it's a plan. Next step would be to move into the budget process, and I fully expect the projects that are listed in 2019-20 you'll see coming up for requests from department heads. So we're just kind of transitioning from a strictly planning tool to the actual funding, and that's where we will do some more prioritizing. So beyond that, I don't know if you had any questions with the latest version, or Lee, if you had anything to add from what we've done.
No, I think that's a great summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. We neglected, by the way, to formally open this public hearing, so before we close it later, we'll account for that. Susan?
Yes. Peter, did you say something about fire and rescue down the road? Joining forces maybe in a new building elsewhere?
That was one of the possibilities that was brought up by both the rescue and fire chief, to at least look at the possibility of a joint facility. Whether that's one organization, that's not determined, but possibly to have both services in one location. Again, given the kind of compact for space in this area, and then also the increased maintenance that's going on at the rescue building. It's just maybe to look at the feasibility of it at this point. Beyond that, there were certainly no other.
So you think like within the next 5 to 10 years, the fire station wouldn't even be there?
That would be a result of the study, I would say. Again, no conclusions, but it's something certainly worth looking at when both facilities have their constraints. Is that the best solution?
I was just curious because, of course, that the library is right there too, and with the parking and all the other problems there, I wonder if it would have been feasible to wait a little bit on some of these projects.
Again, this is just the feasibility study that would be in the plan at this point.
Thank you, Peter. Any other comments from the public? Josh, from the board? Mary?
I had a question for town offices, buildings and grounds on your summary page for the capital improvement plan. It's page 3. You have $141 for town offices for FY 19-20, which we're about to get into. Do you see that, Peter?
141,000.
Yep. That doesn't include a new roof, does it? No, can't possibly.
No, the projects for that would be on, if you flip to page 4.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The projects that total up to that are on that page. It includes
There we go, yep.
office expense,
Oh, yeah.
computers, also another big one there that may again to be deferred, but Darwin, our maintenance head, would like to have a compact tractor to be able to get out onto the trails and do maintenance work there. He's kind of limited now in terms of doing that. That's something that may have to be deferred. Solar energy projects, 20,000, that's in there too, so.
My understanding is no solar should go on this building until the roof is replaced. Do you have any idea how long that what the state of the current roof is and when that might need to be replaced?
I think we had it, let's see.
You've got that for FY 22-23.
Yeah, 22-23, that was Darwin's estimate. That's best estimate at this time, may need to be sooner. It's a membrane roof, and so far it's held up pretty well, but again, with sun on it, and that's, you'll get some deterioration.
Thank you.
Colleen?
No, thank you.
2 questions. So Peter, can you just step us through, I mean, is there a way that we could actually, you said it would be challenging to change anything at this point based on the Planning Commission recommendations, but to me it seems pretty simple if we were to say, hey, open space funding is a commitment of the town and will help inform our budgeting going forward. Could we put $50K in this draft at this point on an annual basis and just move the numbers accordingly?
That was where the Planning Commission was going. I guess my only thought with that is the capital improvement plan really deals with the acquisition of the asset. For instance, we put money aside every year in the highway equipment fund to buy new trucks and that sort of thing. The capital plan actually shows when we purchase it. So I'm not sure if you put 50,000 every year in, that would imply maybe that you're buying open space, $50,000 a year versus putting it aside. I guess I would rather have Gail maybe look at projects that you can see coming up down the road that would need certain funding, and then that would lead to the $50,000 a year.
Yeah, I mean, I have 1 year under my belt of the budget process, but my sense is that the requests annually for the open space fund are somewhat, obviously they're opportunity dependent, but it would be nice if there was a baseline for the board to sort of just start with, as opposed to 0. I mean, to me, 0 seems absolutely inadequate, and relative to other municipalities,
Sure.
really low, right?
Sure.
Just embarrassingly low.
Yeah, and again, I think if we could show, again, like, it's not exactly the same analogy, of course, but with the highway equipment fund, we know where Paul goes out and prices trucks, and he knows how much he's gonna have to pay for those. And then that goes into the capital plan. We're gonna buy trucks in years 2, 3, and 4. The second step is, all right, how do we fund that? And that's where you would go to say, all right, well, we put in $20,000, $30,000 a year, same thing with police cruisers, to fund that. So I guess I want to identify what we think we're going to be spending on a project, show that in the capital plan, which would then lead to the $50,000 a year or whatever. That would be my only take on it. And I don't know, Lee, if you had that encountered, I know you've dealt with capital projects before.
Yeah, the points you raise are quite valid. The tricky piece of open space acquisition is its lack of predictability.
Right.
where replacement cycles for equipment, paving schedules are clearly tangible and predictable. These are, to borrow your phrase, opportunity-driven. You can plan for these things, but you don't always know what's coming when and where the opportunities will arise till they're almost before you. And I've been involved in a lot of open space acquisition projects. Some were easy, like tonight. Some were 5 years of hard negotiation to get to yes, and finding other grants and then supplementing it with local money. It's a trickier piece.
But couldn't we capitalize such a reserve on just indicative, on indicative data that over a prior period of time,
Right. Over
however
6 years,
unpredictable,
we'll acquire
a certain
300K
number of projects have arisen, and we could predictably expect over the next period of time, there would be, I mean, I think we'd make an assumption that there were always projects. Yeah, as long as we were comfortable with the assumption that there will always be projects, could we capitalize the reserve based on expectation?
That's sort of what I was thinking, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I think the ballot item.
Want to let the public know, Gail, who you are?
Gail Albert from the Natural Resources Committee. And the ballot item that we put forward every year is, we look at it very much as a savings account. Because of the very kinds of questions that people are coming up with and concerns people are coming up with tonight about unexpected expenses. And as you just noted, the expenses for natural resources are very unpredictable. We have projects we've been working on, as you said, for 5 years, and we had this one come up, and fortunately it was a small one. Our fund right now has $200,000 in it, $201,157 or something like that. And in the big picture of what development pressure shows and what history shows, the project costs and the land values have not kept up with the kinds of commitments that we've had to make, and some that we've missed out on. I mean, for instance, Shelburne Point was an opportunity that was missed, and so now it's been developed. So, I like to think of the idea of a capital improvement placeholder. At the same time as I like going back to the public every year to reconfirm the commitment to committing to open space. So I wouldn't see this as saying let's have $50,000 every year and letting that be the top level, because it may be that that's really not adequate in the realm of what may be coming forward. The new town plan is certainly taking a lot of support for natural resources, and it's being addressed in a lot of different sections of the plan that we've been working together with. But I really like the idea of putting it out there and saying this is part of what the town believes. So I don't know how you do it without a specific number. I wouldn't want a specific number to hold us back if expenses get to the point where $50,000 is really inadequate. On the other hand, I like the idea of saying let's have a minimum.
Yeah, and these are indicative. I mean, these are not commitments to specific dollars. They're enabling in some cases, as with grant collateral, but these are indicative. My sense, Peter, is what do you think? Jamie has suggested we adopt at this point those several suggestions. It's been recommended, or you asked us to discuss as well some of the project costs that were just described in some detail, which I'd favor including simply as a place marker so that we can have the discussion. And given that these are indicative and not commitments, what do you feel, the both of you, Lee and Peter, is it appropriate to make the change tonight?
Well, what's historically been the allocation that the town has voted on, just in terms of a number?
It's like 2030.
I've been on the committee for close to 25 years, and at the beginning it was $15,000, and it added up for many years. We had no projects, and then there were some large ones, and then there was a period of time when we were doing a penny on the tax rate, and that was netting something in the realm of $100,000 a year, and that went on for several years, and then the board became more conservative in terms of allocating those kinds of things. And lately, in the last 10 years, we've been getting somewhere between 15 and 20, and that just doesn't keep up with land costs here and with the development pressure that goes on. And the properties that we want to save are often in the rural area, and they tend to be larger property. And because they're larger properties, they're often the legacy of families, and they can't go for $20,000. We were fortunate with this piece of property tonight.
What would you recommend in terms of amending this in some fashion? Is that acceptable, Peter?
Sure, I believe
Sure.
that can be done tonight.
Yeah, whatever figure feels comfortable as a placeholder. Again, as Peter noted, ultimately, it has to get baked into the operating budget each year, but.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean,
And that's,
But placeholders can be valuable as
yeah,
reminders that.
I think it's just, I think it would have enduring value is that, and,
yeah, I agree. I mean, to me, it's directional, right?
Yeah.
We sort of see a number there and just
yeah,
look across 5-6 years and have a sense of what that investment's going to be.
yeah.
So your proposal would be to include,
I would like to see it in this version that we're approving so that we're not waiting a year to have the same conversation.
and put them out in each year for that, as you're saying? Or-
I think so.
Yeah, I would stretch it out.
And I guess I would just want to clarify that it doesn't mean you're buying open space every
Right.
year,
No,
like the
that's
capital
why
plan
we
does.
set the ballot item,
Yeah.
right? There's going to be better information at that point in time.
Mhm.
But as you say, it's like putting into the tractor fund or the.
Right.
It's that same
Right.
kind of process.
I would just note
Sort
that.
of a
that-
reserve.
Right, that
yeah,
it's not
Yep.
meaning you're, because everything else
Yeah.
means you're going to spend the money in that year,
Yeah,
the way the capital plan is set up. So I would just want to make that distinction if you did that in this.
Right.
Yeah.
we have the additional issue of submitting this particular request unusually as a separate matter to the town to vote on. And it may well be we come to the point where we incorporate that in budget. It has to be calculated as a potential budget impact anyway. And maybe we think that through. We have a lot of opportunity between now and when we're gonna sit and go through budget in some detail.
Gail,
Are- Colleen?
Sorry, Jerry, I thought you were done. Go ahead. I just have a question about how you would expend it, or how it was done in the past when there was a line item. And so if you say you had 100,000, and I know this never happens, but 2 years without an acquisition, and you had 100,000, if we allocated 50,000 a year, and then something came up for 115,000, would you spend the 100,000 that's already in the fund and then do a bond for the 15,000, or would you just bond for the 115,000 and then save the 100,000 for a future project?
Frankly, we've been fortunate in the past because we have done this savings account over time. And so what happens is the money that we allocate in the ballot item every year goes into a fund that is designated for the open space fund. And then when we do draw down some monies, I believe, Peter, we take them first from that year's allocation, and then if there's more, we go into the savings account to be able to grab it. And the other additional benefit from that is by doing it that way, we actually earn interest on the money, whereas if we had to bond for the monies that we were using, we would pay interest on it. And so this way, we're not asking the town unexpectedly to come up with $200,000 if that was what a project was requesting. In fact, we're going into the fund, and right now, we can fund that. We'll have to make it up, and there may not be another project that comes up for a number of years. And when I've done my requests in the past for budget requests, each year I've put in a history of the open space fund and what the allocations have been from the town and what the expenditures have been and what properties they've gone to. And what we also try to do is leverage funds with the funds that we have from other organizations in order to be able to make a much larger payment to what, as we did with the bar farm, for instance. In that case, we took a certain amount of monies from the open space fund, and that leveraged money from the Housing Conservation Board, from the Vermont Land Trust, and from other funds that the Land Trust was, had it accessible to them. So in terms of which comes first, though, Peter, can you help me with that?
But typically goes into the fund one way or the other. So it's designated for the open space fund. Either it's spent before it goes in, or if it's not spent, then it does go in. So it's really either way, I guess. Yeah, yeah. So we typically don't bond for open space. Typically it is spent out of the fund, and we try to build up the fund in anticipation of how much we would need. We haven't, since I've been here, actually taken out a loan for it. Again, Gail and her committee works to try to leverage those grants so that we can do the deal with the amount of money that we have in the fund.
And we work hard with those conservation organizations to balance what they can afford versus what we can afford. And we've been lucky.
Thank you, Gail. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. Is there a motion to conclude this public hearing, which might also note that we did
Open it.
open.
I move to open
So,
it. I move to open and
and
conclude this
Thank you.
public hearing.
Don't we
on-
need to approve the plan?
Once we're out of the hearing.
It's a hearing.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll move to open and conclude the hearing on the capital
Thank you.
improvement plan.
Mary saves
Efficient.
the day. Josh seconds.
Second.
Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Now that the public hearing is concluded, is there a motion to the effect of approving the CIP as presented with, including as it will, of the several items just discussed?
I would
Jamie moves.
I would clarify that to say including a line item for open space funding in the amount of $50,000 annually.
Motion. Josh seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
Whoops,
Thank you,
that was an
Peter, very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
The next item is the priority list work plan. You'll note that Lee has already commented to the effect that this is kind of a period piece at the moment. Events simply outran this effort, which was intended to, as a matter of prudent management, to account for time and things that needed to be done prior to year end. Under one scenario, that would have been the date at which Lee left us, and to account for what could have been a somewhat prolonged period of time before a new manager was in place. It seems to me there's some value to this yet, but we would have to ask you to rethink this with us. Certainly, in one sense, the timing. Maybe this serves as a 3-month plan, maybe not. Some of these items will not only change, obviously, with the change in Lee's status, but will change in terms of his availability in the future. I think the other thing to say about it is there was recognition on his part that we have a fairly full plate. Some of the items of which are taking a considerable amount of time. The library project we've been introduced to already. And with budget upon us, I think the sense was it would be good for us to support Lee in establishing our guidance as to what are priority items we think ought to be addressed here in the shorter term, and what items do we think way at the other end could be deferred until a point when much of the priority stuff had been accomplished. So, on the one hand, I kind of apologize, on the other hand, we did this before we knew what we know now. And with that, Lee, do you want to?
Well, given changing circumstances, I wonder if we want to take a look at this tonight or hold off to our next meeting on the 27th and take a fresh look. Josh had, reminded us of some items he thought
Yeah.
we needed to plug into the
Sure.
mix. And now that I will be with us longer than the end of the calendar year, maybe some of these pieces may juggle. So just a thought, maybe hold off to
Sure,
the
I
next
would
meeting.
fully expect so.
And yeah, I think it's just rejiggering the sort of the concept, as you said, versus what the town manager's priorities are versus what the select board and the towns, the items that we've talked about in the past to try to do this in a sort of holistic, what are the kinds of things we need to get done and in what time frame. So
And it
I
kind of moves
agree.
us further to what we had been doing in the summer, which
right.
we took a detour to account for an immediate situation. So if everybody's comfortable with that, why don't we ask you to reintroduce it on the 27th?
Sure.
Where there can be now a few items already
That-
checked off.
Right.
Checked
And
off the list.
Is that
Yeah.
okay with everybody?
Yes.
Yep. Any comment? Thank you. The next idea is something for which I'm responsible, and I'm going to ask us,
I think we do. It's a-
I'm going to ask us all to, let me delay this until the 27th.
The Innovative
No.
Idea Award?
Yeah, the award. The award's intended to be, not, the response from the departments is not intended to be, it's not meant to take a lot of time. So, as long as we have, the grace of the award is that it'll be before they come to the budget
Okay.
thing, so.
So there will be something written? and
Yeah,
that-
here's the quick summary is, the idea was, and the best example is for the police department, is to seek their thinking in a very brief response of what would patrol be in 3 to 5 years with self-driving cars. And I've got a series of those, including one for Peter and for all the departments, and the idea was an award would be made and given at the end of the year, an award of uncertain character and certainly of little expense. But the idea was to encourage and for all of us to participate in some wild-eyed, innovative thinking ahead. So we'll revisit that on the 27th if everybody's okay with that.
Jerry, technically, do you need, because those are both 13 and 14 were both decision items, do you need a motion to table those?
We can, that'd be, of course.
Either way, but certainly it's
Is
easy
there
enough to
one?
do.
Yeah, sure.
Josh moves,
So moved.
Second.
Colleen seconds. Any further discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Thank you, Colleen.
Mr. Chairman, would it be appropriate at this point in time for me to move to consider going into executive session pursuant to 1 VSA Section 313.3 for contract negotiations regarding solar panels on the library? I note that and invite Kathy Townsend and Ruth Hagerman to come to that meeting. I note they're waiting here, and I don't think we need much time, maybe 5 minutes or 10. Would that be possible? We can go into an executive discussion to discuss that contract.
Sounds fine to me. Are you gonna make, will you
So I
make both
move
motions?
to do that, yeah. And
First
then,
motion?
to move to go into executive session pursuant to 1 VSA Section 313.3 for contract negotiations regarding solar panels on top of the library, and invite Ruth Hagerman and Kathy Townsend to attend.
And then do you want to come out of executive session and then we'll make further motions for the additional executive session?
Yes, I think so.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
And I'd like to have a motion on that, and then to find that premature general public knowledge regarding the contract negotiations would place the town at a substantial disadvantage.
Second.
Seconded by Colleen. Any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those
Aye.
opposed, nay.
Now I would move to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 VSA Section 313(1)A, or 313(3), to enter, to have contract negotiations, if we have to do it in a two-step process.
Moved by Mary, seconded by Colleen. Any discussion? Those approving, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed, nay. Thank you.
So can we stay here, or do we have to go?
We have to go.
What we'll do, Matty, is come back, exit one, open the other immediately, and it's uncertain whether we would come out of the second one with any item. So I don't.
Oh, this is the VCI.
And then we,
Are they just staying in there and
We have a, no, we have a core.
Here.
Is there a motion to exit executive session and resume general session?
Second.
So moved by
Me.
Josh, seconded by Jamie. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. Two colleagues are not present for the vote. The next item is to enter executive session pursuant to 1 Vermont statutes annotated 313, para 3, for contract negotiations regarding appointment or employment of a public officer, in this case, town manager, and we would invite the town manager to join us.
Interim town manager. The interim town manager at this point.
That's true. The interim town manager.
Just,
The interim town manager, correct. Is there a motion? One of steps of the two?
so moved.
Moved by Josh.
Second.
Seconded by Jamie. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, nay. And once again, Colleen and Mary are not present to vote. Is there a motion in what we've identified as step 2?
I don't have it in front of me.
To enter executive session?
Motion to enter executive session pursuant to 1 VSA 313(1)A regarding the appointment or employment of a public officer.
And seconded, Josh. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, nay. And once again, Colleen and Mary are now present to vote. And we will invite the interim town manager. Thank you. Is there a motion to exit executive session and resume general session?
So moved.
So moved
Second.
by Mary, seconded by Josh. Any discussion? Hearing none. Will those approve, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, nay. Would you like to make the motion, statement?
No motion, other than the board has delegated me to work with Brian Monahan and Don Jutton, our executive search consultant, to work directly with Lee on remaining contract negotiations, and which we intend to do over the next week to 2. And we'll update everybody at the next select board meeting on the 27th.
Move to adjourn?
Adjourn?
No.
Colleen
Nope.
moves to adjourn?
Oh, one more thing.
Oh, we
Yeah.
have,
Motion to apply for
Thank you.
a super duper grant for electric car charging station or stations at the new library
as presented.
town center.
So
Okay,
this would
let's hear it.
authorize me as the municipal official, as the grant administrator, and it needs one of you as a backup administrator on this.
Mary,
Okie dokie.
go with it?
Yeah.
Mary, spelled M-A-R-Y.
Yes. And then if you do pass the motion, if you'd please each sign this.
Is
before you
there
adjourn.
What is
a second?
the motion?
Mary, did you?
Josh
someone-
seconded.
I did move.
Mary moved, Josh seconded.
Okay.
Any
All in
discussion?
favor?
Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, and those opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
Move to adjourn?
Thank you.
Colleen moves to adjourn.
Can I do it now?
Second.
Josh seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, those approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
and those opposed, nay. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.